The storm hit with an almost unnatural ferocity, rain lashing the tarmac in sheets so thick that visibility was nearly zero. The small private jet skidded helplessly on the slippery runway, its engine straining and coughing as if pleading for mercy. Inside the cabin, the billionaire CEO was thrown against the seats as the aircraft tilted dangerously to one side, water seeping through the doors and windows. Panic rippled like wildfire, passengers screaming, clinging to whatever they could as the cabin began to flood. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the chaos in stark, white flashes, highlighting the terrified faces pressed against the windows. Amidst the screaming and confusion, one figure moved with a calm that defied the storm. A single dad, drenched from head to toe, had run toward the jet after seeing it veer off course, ignoring the howl of the wind and the sheets of rain that pelted him. With each step through the growing puddles and mud, he fought the pull of the wind and the slippery surface, his hands reaching out to the edge of the cabin. The water inside was rising fast, swirling around passengers' legs, and the smell of fuel mixed with the acrid tang of fear filled the air. Without hesitation, he pulled at the CEO's arm, feeling the strain of the heavy, soaked clothing and the panicked flailing, yet refusing to let go. The jet groaned as it shifted again, the water sloshing violently, threatening to drag them under at any moment. Summoning every ounce of strength, he waded through the water, dragging the CEO toward the edge where the rain-slicked tarmac met the shallow but freezing lake. Around them, debris floated, splintered luggage and overturned seats adding to the chaos, yet he never faltered, never paused to calculate the risk. Finally, with a desperate heave, he pulled the CEO free of the cabin just as the nose of the jet dipped fully into the water, the fuselage sinking beneath the waves with a deafening roar, leaving only the pounding rain and the adrenaline-fueled heartbeat of survival echoing across the storm-torn runway. The single dad collapsed beside the CEO on the wet ground, shivering, soaked, and trembling from the exertion, yet alive, having faced the storm and the impossible without hesitation. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, leaving the ground slick and muddy, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and jet fuel. The single dad sat on the edge of the tarmac, his clothes plastered to his skin, water dripping from his hair and eyelashes, but his focus never wavered from the man lying beside him. The billionaire CEO gasped and coughed, his chest heaving as he tried to draw in clean breaths, his expensive suit ruined, soaked through and clinging uncomfortably. He looked up at the single dad, eyes wide with a mix of fear, disbelief, and an overwhelming surge of gratitude, as if the reality of being alive after the sinking jet had yet to fully sink in. Around them, emergency crews moved efficiently, their umbrellas bobbing through the rain-soaked tarmac, stretchers and medical kits in hand, but the CEO's attention remained locked on the man who had risked everything to save him. The single dad brushed mud and debris from his own arms, trying to appear casual, though his body trembled from exertion and shock, refusing to acknowledge the weight of what he had just accomplished. I don't even know how to thank you, the CEO said finally, his voice rough from coughing, the words catching on the remnants of fear still clinging to him. The single dad shook his head, wet hair sticking to his forehead, insisting, no need. Just glad you're okay. But the CEO could see past the humble words, recognizing a strength and selflessness that went far beyond ordinary heroism. There was no hesitation, no desire for recognition, only a raw, instinctive courage that had driven him to act when every instinct in the world would have screamed to run. As the emergency responders approached with blankets and medical equipment, the CEO instinctively tried to rise, but the single dad steadied him, holding him with a protective, quiet authority that seemed to say, "You're not leaving this ground until you're safe." The moment stretched, the drizzle falling softly around them, washing the tarmac clean of the night's chaos, and yet the weight of the ordeal lingered in the air. The CEO's mind raced, replaying the terrifying plunge into the water, the sound of the cabin groaning, the sharp sting of cold as the single dad's hands had gripped him and pulled him to safety. He found himself studying the man's face, etched with determination and fatigue, a stark contrast to the usual polished, controlled world he inhabited. There was something almost reverent in the way the CEO watched him, a recognition that courage could exist in the most unexpected places, in someone who lived a life defined not by wealth or influence, but by responsibility and love for those around him. Children's voices echoed faintly in the distance, reminding the single dad of the life he had to return to, the ordinary world of school runs, bills, and meals that waited despite the extraordinary night. Yet here, in this suspended moment, the magnitude of what had just happened pressed down on them both. The CEO, feeling the raw human connection of being saved by someone who asked for nothing in return, reached out and gripped the single dad's arm with a firmness that conveyed more than words could: respect, gratitude, and an unspoken promise that this act would not be forgotten. The single dad nodded, brushing off the gesture with a shrug, unwilling to dwell on heroism, while inside, the quiet pride of having done the right thing warmed him despite the cold, wet night. Around them, the world slowly began to reclaim order, the emergency crew guiding passengers away, sirens fading, the drizzle easing into a light mist. But the CEO remained seated on the damp tarmac for a moment longer, studying the man who had risked his life, feeling a shift in his own understanding of what it meant to be powerful. It was not in wealth, influence, or control, it was in acts of courage, in choices made in the face of fear, and in the willingness to put oneself at risk for another. And in that still, rain-soaked moment, two lives had irrevocably changed, one saved, the other forever defined by an act that demanded nothing but gave everything. The morning after the storm broke clear, leaving the town washed in a muted gray light that softened the jagged edges of the night's chaos. Puddles glimmered on the asphalt, reflecting the early sun in scattered patches, and the smell of wet earth and grass hung thick in the air. The single dad moved through his small home, exhausted but determined to return to routine, tending to breakfast dishes, helping his children get ready for school, his movements automatic yet tinged with the memory of last night's terror. He was soaked in fatigue and mud-streaked clothes, yet he carried himself with a quiet pride that came from knowing he had faced a danger most could not imagine and emerged unbroken. Outside, the air was calm, almost deceptively peaceful, and the faint hum of normal life began to settle over the neighborhood. Without warning, the sound of powerful engines cut through the morning calm, sharp and unmistakable, echoing off the low-slung houses and drawing the children to the windows with wide-eyed curiosity. The gravel driveway shook under the weight of three sleek black Cadillacs rolling in perfect formation, their polished surfaces catching the weak sunlight and casting long reflections across the wet pavement. The single dad froze, a dish towel still in his hands, his heart skipping as he took in the unexpected sight. The children pressed their faces against the glass, whispers of awe and confusion spilling from their lips. The lead car rolled to a stop, doors opening with precise, almost ceremonial timing, and the CEO emerged, flanked by assistants and security, his gaze immediately finding the man who had saved him. There was no flourish or ostentation in his approach, just a measured confidence that spoke of gratitude and intent, a silent acknowledgement that he had come not to show off but to honor what had been done. The single dad stepped outside, mud clinging to his shoes, damp hair sticking to his forehead, and stared at the cars, unsure if this was a dream or some surreal consequence of the night before. The CEO approached with a purposeful stride, rain still dripping from his own soaked clothing, the wind tugging lightly at his collar. "I couldn't leave without seeing you," he said simply, his voice carrying a weight that made the single dad straighten involuntarily. The entourage hovered quietly, giving space but ready, their presence a subtle reminder of the power and wealth surrounding him, yet irrelevant compared to the raw human connection between these two men. The CEO gestured toward the cars, a quiet acknowledgement of the reality that had come with his gratitude, but the single dad looked past the luxury, seeing only the sincerity in the eyes of the man he had saved. The children clustered around their father, whispering questions about the shiny cars and the man in the fancy suit, but he just shook his head, still processing the enormity of the scene. The CEO knelt slightly to meet the father's gaze, speaking with a calm intensity that made the air feel heavier, charged with meaning. "What you did, what you risked, it's not something money can repay," he said, voice steady but infused with emotion. "But I want to make sure you and your family are taken care of. You don't have to accept everything, just know that I mean to help." The single dad felt a tug between humility and the strange pull of opportunity, his pride warring with the weight of the gratitude being offered. The CEO handed him a small card, the edges crisp and sharp, a tangible symbol of a promise that transcended wealth and touched on respect and recognition. The quiet hum of the neighborhood resumed around them, neighbors emerging curiously at the sight of the cars, the children's whispers filling the gaps in the still morning. The single dad looked at the CEO, understanding the unspoken truth that had brought him here. Courage had been acknowledged, bravery rewarded, and yet the simplicity of the act remained untainted. The Cadillacs glinted in the pale sunlight, a contrast to the ordinary driveway, a stark reminder that extraordinary deeds could ripple far beyond the storm, far beyond expectation, and that sometimes, gratitude arrives not in words but in presence and the weight of a promise carried silently in the engine's hum. The conversation between the single dad and the CEO carried a weight that seemed to stretch the morning itself, the mist curling around the driveway and clinging to the edges of the Cadillacs like a silent witness. The CEO's gaze was steady, unwavering, filled with an intensity that was both commanding and strangely vulnerable, as if the memory of the sinking jet still lingered in every line of his face. He spoke carefully, offering opportunities that went far beyond the immediate, gestures of assistance that were meant to elevate not just the man who had saved him, but the family that had shaped him into someone capable of such courage. Each word was deliberate, measured, yet carried an undercurrent of urgency, a desire to ensure that no act of bravery went unrecognized or unsupported. The single dad shifted uneasily, feeling the pull of these offers, yet grounded in his pride and the rhythm of a life that had always demanded resilience, self-reliance, and humility. The children hovered nearby, their curiosity uncontainable, eyes wide as they took in the black cars, the suited figures, and the stranger speaking with such intensity to their father. They sensed the gravity of the moment even if they could not fully comprehend it, the air around them thick with a tension that was both exciting and intimidating. Their father, soaked and tired but unwavering, spoke sparingly, refusing to let gratitude erode the sense of responsibility that defined him. The CEO, sensing the hesitation, leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a more intimate tone, speaking of futures, possibilities, and safety, each word designed to reassure, to bridge the impossible gap between their worlds. The subtle contrast of wealth and ordinary life played across the driveway like a living tableau, yet neither man focused on appearances. Their connection was rooted in a single night's extraordinary events and the shared recognition of courage in its purest form. Every gesture from the CEO was precise, yet unpretentious, as if he understood the delicate balance between offering help and imposing it. He outlined plans for education, opportunities for work, access to resources that could ease the burden of everyday survival, all framed as extensions of respect and admiration rather than charity. The single dad's eyes narrowed in quiet reflection, weighing the offers, his mind flicking back to the storm, the icy water, the fear, and the instinct that had driven him. He realized that his life could change in ways he had never imagined, yet the essence of who he was, the man who acted without expectation, who faced danger to save another, remained untouchable. The CEO nodded, sensing the internal struggle, and offered reassurance without pressure, leaving the choice entirely in his hands while the children clung to their father's legs, sensing that something monumental was unfolding. The sun began to rise higher, scattering the morning mist, and the polished Cadillacs reflected light across the wet driveway in a dazzling display. The CEO finally stood straight, extending his hand in a gesture that blended gratitude, respect, and a quiet authority that came from both power and sincerity. The single dad clasped it firmly, acknowledging the depth of the offer without letting the act of acceptance compromise his independence or humility. Around them, the world moved on slowly. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, birds chirped tentatively in the clearing sky, and the quiet hum of engines filled the air as the entourage prepared to depart. Yet the moment lingered, stretched in significance, a bridge between two entirely different lives now irrevocably connected by courage, respect, and the unspoken understanding that some acts, though born of necessity, leave marks that money or status could never replicate. Even as the CEO and his entourage prepared to leave, the single dad remained on the driveway, looking after them with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and quiet pride. The children whispered among themselves, eyes wide and hearts racing, sensing the extraordinary significance of what had unfolded without fully grasping the details. The Cadillacs' engines roared to life, echoing across the calm morning, a stark contrast to the soft drizzle of earlier, and as they pulled away, the single dad felt the weight of possibilities now open to him. He understood that the world had shifted slightly, irrevocably, and though the ordinary routine of work, meals, and family awaited him, there was now a new dimension to life, one shaped by courage, recognition, and the subtle, powerful influence of gratitude that could ripple far beyond a single stormy night. Months passed, but the memory of that stormy night and the unexpected arrival of the three Cadillacs remained vivid in the single dad's mind, weaving itself quietly into the fabric of his daily life. The children, still fascinated, would occasionally ask questions about the man in the fancy suit or the shiny black cars, their curiosity bubbling over in innocent excitement, while he smiled and deflected, choosing instead to preserve the magic of the memory without overwhelming them with its gravity. Life had resumed its usual rhythm. School runs, grocery trips, bills, and the small triumphs and frustrations of ordinary existence. But underneath it all, a subtle current of change flowed, a quiet reminder that extraordinary acts had a way of echoing long after the immediate danger had passed. Occasionally, letters and small parcels would arrive, carefully placed on the doorstep or left with a local courier, unsigned but unmistakably linked to the billionaire CEO. Each package carried something different. A book that spoke of opportunity and courage, a gift for the children, an envelope containing information that could help with work or education. The single dad would examine them with careful consideration, appreciating the thought behind them without letting them disrupt the life he had fought to maintain for his family. The children would gather around, peering over his shoulders, their excitement mixing with awe as they touched objects that seemed so far removed from the ordinary world they knew, yet now intertwined with the life of their father. The CEO himself would occasionally appear, in the distance at first, checking in through phone calls or messages, subtle gestures that conveyed both gratitude and a desire to ensure that the single dad and his family were thriving. These interactions were never overbearing. They carried the weight of respect and the quiet power of acknowledgement, a recognition that transcended the typical transactional nature of wealth. The single dad maintained his humility, careful not to let the opportunities alter the core of who he was, yet he also allowed himself moments of reflection, realizing that the events of that night had given him and his children experiences that would shape them profoundly. The community around them began to take notice too, whispering stories about the man who had risked everything to save a stranger, the courage of a father whose actions had bridged worlds. The single dad remained grounded, aware that heroism does not always require recognition, yet he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his choice had left an imprint, not just on the CEO, but on the larger narrative of their small town. The children began to internalize lessons of bravery, empathy, and resilience, seeing their father as a living example of courage that could not be bought or taught but demonstrated through action in moments that mattered most. And in the CEO's world of glass towers, boardrooms, and relentless pursuit of success, the memory of that night lingered with a sharp clarity. It was a reminder that wealth and power, while influential, were never a substitute for courage, integrity, and human connection. He carried it into his decisions, his priorities subtly shifting as he reflected on the singular act that had altered the course of both their lives. For the single dad, the quiet gestures, letters, and opportunities served as ongoing reminders that heroism resonates far beyond the immediate, rippling outward in ways that transform ordinary life into something quietly extraordinary, a testament to the enduring impact of courage, selflessness, and the unspoken bond formed in the heart of a storm.